Hello, everybody. Welcome back to the Insightful Thinkers podcast. Today we are doing another movie analysis, Moonlight, Barry Jenkins, his 2016 film, and one of the best films I've ever seen. If you guys have seen it, you may think so too, because this is widely recognized as one of the best films of the 21st century. And it is it's won many awards. It's the Golden Globe Award winner for Best Motion Picture Drama, and it won the Academy Award for Best Picture. That was the year when there was the confusion with La La Land, when they thought La La Land had won, which is an equally incredible movie, but this movie I think did deserve it because of how incredibly deep it really is on emotional and philosophical levels. It's just such a powerful movie in so many ways. It really is just one of the best I've ever seen, and one of the deepest movies I've ever seen. For all of you guys who enjoy the deeper movies and enjoy to analyze and break down these things, then I hope this will be an interesting podcast episode to listen to. So we can discuss kind of what I picked out, and maybe you guys will have similar thoughts too. Obviously, this will have a spoiler alert. We're doing in-depth analysis here at Insightful Thinkers Media, so we're not just gonna glance over. We're gonna really go into a lot of plot details. So please watch the movie before listening to or watching this episode. So Moonlight, it's a coming-of-age story that follows a gay black boy as he grows up in the Miami ghetto. And coming-of-age story, what is that? So a coming-of-age story, it focuses on the growth of a protagonist from youth to adulthood. So this movie is told in 3 parts. Part 1 is, his name is Chiron, but part 1 is, he's called Little, part 2 is Chiron, and part 3 is Black. So he kind of embodies different personas as he grows up, and this is why it's this coming of age story. And in sum, I wrote this little kind of just a paragraph to describe what this movie is talking about, and this will kind of similar to the way we did it Too Long Didn't Listen for To Pimp a Butterfly. If you see the length of this podcast episode and it's too long for you and you don't want to listen, this will actually be good enough to center you to understand kind of what the movie was about in general. So Barry Jenkins' 2016 film Moonlight illustrates the challenges of being oneself in the face of negative societal influence. In the face of pressures to conform to stereotypes, to portray oneself in a way that is acceptable to others, or simply to survive in a strenuous environment, it can become nearly impossible to remain unbound from society's shackles of expectation. Because societal influence can force someone to suppress who they are, this person can become molded into someone who is unrecognizable to others and even to themselves. When moments of freedom do arise for these people, it can be like standing under the moonlight by the ocean. While their skin reflects a blue tint, they look different to others, but at the same time feel free as the one who stands without a care under the moonlight. Paradoxically, it is in the most vulnerable state of judgment from others for being oneself when a person feels the most profound sense of freedom. This is what came across to me in this movie, at least. And it's just such a powerful message, and how the story was told really, it really conveys this message in an incredible way, in the cinematography, in just in the dialogue, in so many aspects. And that's what makes a Best Picture film. It needs to have a lot of different aspects to make it the best movie of the year at the Oscars, or the Academy Awards. So the main theme in this movie is kind of what I just discussed here. So it's the difficulty of being yourself while being shaped by negative societal influence. That's what really came across in this movie. And this was experienced by 3 characters. Chiron, the main character, Juan, the drug dealer who kind of mentors Chiron as he's little, as he's a kid, and Kevin, Chiron's best friend since they were little kids. So they all experience some kind of a negative societal influence in different ways that kind of molds them into being someone they're not, or at least gives them some kind of a conflict with who they really are compared to what society influences them to be. So in part one, Juan, who is the neighborhood kingpin drug dealer who I mentioned, takes Chiron under his wing. He takes Chiron under his wing after he sees Chiron being chased by bullies. And in one of his conversations with Chiron, he introduces this idea of choosing your own identity and your own destiny versus conforming to societal norms. So Juan says, "I was a wild little shorty just like you, man, running with no shoes on in the moonlight. Then this old lady said, in the moonlight, black boys look blue. So that's what I'm going to call you, Blue." And Chiron says, "So you call yourself Blue?" And Juan says, "Nah. At some point, you got to decide who you're going to be. You can't let anyone make that decision for you." So Juan is kind of introducing this idea to Chiron as a little kid that just because you're looked at a certain way, just because that blue tint comes off your face in the moonlight to others, doesn't mean you have to fit other people's every expectation and label. Although Juan provides this advice to Chiron, who is little at this stage in the movie and is just a little kid, we see how difficult it is for Chiron to actually follow this instruction and resist being shaped by society's expectation and to really show who he is. And he ends up taking on this persona, this little kid who's been bullied and who is gay and who faces a lot of abuse and has a difficult household. He ends up becoming this hard drug dealer in the end and puts on this persona with chains and gold teeth and a nice car and things like this. And he ends up being shaped by society's expectations, even though Juan kind of already said, hey, eventually you got to figure out who you're going to be. And it's not to say that at the end of the movie it's too late for Chiron to figure that out, and the end of the movie we'll talk about how maybe it does illustrate that Chiron will finally come to grips with who he really is. But throughout his life and throughout the movie, he doesn't follow Juan's advice of choosing who he's going to be. And so Juan, how does he experience the this conflict between society's pressures and who he really is? Well, he experiences a lot of conflict and cognitive dissonance of this good guy drug dealer who, so a conflict between societal influence that kind of maybe made him into this drug dealer because of his bad neighborhood and his upbringing and maybe pressures that he needed to deal drugs to survive, versus his true empathetic, caring personality. So despite him trying to help and mentor Chiron while feeding him and giving him a place to stay, he gets reprimanded by Chiron's mother because in the end, even though you're still helping my son, you're still selling drugs to me. So Chiron's mom says, "You're going to keep selling me rocks, like cocaine rocks? I'm getting it from you, but you're going to raise my son, right?" That's what Chiron's mom, Chiron's drug addicted mom, says to Juan. And later, we also have a conversation between Chiron and Juan. Chiron says to Juan, "Do you sell drugs?" Juan says, "Yeah." Chiron says, "My mom, she does drugs, right?" Juan says, "Yeah." And Chiron leaves the house in sadness because he kind of realizes that his mentor, who is maybe trying to help him, still is the one who's hurting his mother. And as a little kid, he doesn't really understand this duality of personalities, kind of, that Juan can he can still take the words of advice from Juan, even though he does some negative things on the side. So Chiron can't separate that, and he can't separate his mother's pain, and he essentially can't. He no longer can use Juan as a mentor because he just completely associates Juan with pain now, because Juan causes his mother to be associated with drugs and addicted to drugs, and then it hurts Chiron. So it's very difficult for Chiron as a little kid, and Juan knows that. And as Chiron leaves the house, it shows Juan just in extreme sadness because he knows, man, like, I really want to be a good mentor to this little kid, but how can I do that if I'm selling drugs to his very mother? It just causes such a great conflict for Juan, and perhaps his circumstances have played a role in pushing him to deal drugs to make a living. And although he has these kind and empathetic traits, his behavior of selling drugs to the mother of the very child he is trying to help, it totally conflicts with these positive traits, unfortunately. And this is a cognitive dissonance. This is a common idea in psychology, commonly cited idea in psychology, and it's basically a disconnect between thoughts and behaviors. So, for instance, an example of cognitive dissonance would be you smoke like regularly, despite knowing that there's a high chance you'll develop lung cancer. So you do the behavior of smoking, even though your cognition or your thought knows you probably are going to get lung cancer. That's complete cognitive dissonance. So here we see that in Juan. We see the conflict of being yourself, while being in compared to being what a society makes you out to be. So it causes Juan this inner conflict as he tries to be a mentor for a young boy while selling drugs. So he really has a disconnect between his internal feelings of care for the boy, between his behavior of being a drug dealer. And this is that societal influence that maybe played a role in making him a drug dealer versus who he really is, this caring person who maybe just wants to help kids grow up in a good environment. Now let's talk about Chiron, who throughout the movie goes through the transition phase as a little kid, and Chiron as a teenager, and then Black as an adult, as a hardened drug dealing adult. And so Chiron, how did he experience this similar thing to Juan of being himself versus being shaped by society? Well, let's start with a little bit of kind of plot things that were introduced early in the movie. So as little, or as Chiron in his early and then teenage years, he was severely bullied for being gay from a very, very early age. His mother also tells him things like, yeah, you need to find a place to stay in times when she's going to be doing drugs and having a man over that night. And she also steals his pocket money to buy drugs. She pressures Chiron into giving up any dollars he has in his pocket just so she can buy drugs. Chiron has to sleep at the train station some nights, and he spends other nights at the house of Juan and his girlfriend Teresa. And after Juan dies, Teresa still remains this mother figure to him and feeds him and things like this. He's going through severe pain as a kid. On a couple occasions early in life, there are parts in the movie where Chiron can seemingly hardly process what people are saying to him. So this is shown by lip movements and speech sounds being out of sync in the movie. So they'll be talking. If you're watching on YouTube, it would be like, I'm talking right now, but the audio is playing back like a couple seconds off, or a couple seconds in advance, or a couple seconds behind. And from Chiron's perspective, this kind of came across to me as if his mind is in almost such a haze from all these difficult events in his life and things like this, that his own thoughts rest so heavily upon him that it makes it difficult for him to even understand what people are saying. Everything becomes it's like some kind of a depersonalization, or things become unreal to him almost. He's in a very severe haze from the difficult experiences he's had as so early in life. And the one positive thing that actually happens to him, or seemingly positive in the moment, is he has his first sexual experience with his best friend Kevin as a teenager. And but I say seemingly positive because immediately after this experience, Kevin actually ends up betraying Chiron after being pressured by bullies to beat him up. So after this, Chiron finally snaps at all the bullying and all these things he's faced, and he hits the bully over the head with a chair and is sent to juvenile hall. And after this, we pick back up on Chiron's story when he becomes Black. So Chiron has now become this tough guy, this drug dealer. He's the muscular, the rugged, the fly drug dealing kingpin now. He even has a crown on the dash of his car, just like the crown that Juan had on his car. He even drives the almost exact same car as Juan. So he has picked up some things from his environment, but he hasn't picked up those positive messages from Juan. He's picked up the drug dealing image, consciously or subconsciously, and he ends up being just like Juan in all the wrong ways, unfortunately, because of his environment and all the pain and all the things that have led up to this. His license plate even says Black 305 on it, even though he never liked when Kevin called him the name Black in high school. So he's almost embodying these labels that other people have given him, rather than following his own personality. He embodies this name Black, this strong, hardcore guy, and he embodies the drug dealer image of Juan rather than the positive messages that Juan was trying to tell him of be yourself. Don't just be what others make you to be. He chose, unfortunately, Chiron, or Black now, chooses to be Black, and instead of being who he really is. And he got all mixed up along the way, it seems. So Juan's message, it didn't quite come through for Black. The message that at some point you got to decide who you're going to be. You can't let anyone make that decision for you. Unfortunately, though, we see now that Black has allowed society to decide who he is rather than deciding for himself. Black even shows another parallel with Juan. He holds hatred for his mother just like Juan did. When Black was a kid, Juan said that I hated my mom too. And this is yet another parallel with Juan, showing how he was shaped by others rather than choosing who he wanted to be. So he kind of ends up hating his mom just like Juan did, and he is almost parallel to Juan in all the wrong ways. And he uses this role model in kind of all the negative ways. He ends up hating his mom. He ends up being a drug dealer rather than just being himself, like Juan was trying to tell him. Eventually, though, Black does make peace with his mother. But even in this scene, we see more of this theme of choosing who you will be rather than allowing life experiences to dictate who you become. His mom says to him when they finally make up, when Chiron is a man and is now goes by Black, his mom says, your heart ain't got to be black like mine. You ain't got to love me, but you got to know that I love you. So his mom is essentially saying to him, you don't have to be black like the world made you. So Chiron ended up kind of growing into this name that he hated that he was given, and his heart also kind of became black. So just like he was given the name Black, he almost, when he didn't want to be, he almost throughout his life, he ended up embodying this Black character through almost like a self-fulfilling prophecy. A self-fulfilling prophecy is essentially when an individual's experiences, when an individual's expectations eventually result in them acting in ways that confirm the expectations. So with what society imposed on him, or what Kevin imposed this name Black on him early on, and he didn't embody that, but then he eventually grows just into becoming Black just because of the expectations that have been imposed on him. So that's very interesting what has happened now to Chiron, and he grew into what his experiences made him rather than he truly was. He's just this shy, he's this sensitive, he's this timid person. And he did not remain this way. He became the total opposite. He almost became so strong physically so as to compensate for all the times that people made him feel weak. And this overcompensation idea is almost like a sub-theme within the theme of being shaped by society, rather than choosing your own destiny. So those who were once called weak, for instance, try to become the strongest. It's something of a rebound effect almost. So you can literally see this as Chiron works out in the movie. You see him pumping iron, and the sounds of his mother's voicemail play in his head. He thinks of this call from his mother telling him to come over because she hasn't seen him in a while. But at this point, he hasn't made up with his mother. He's still feeling that hatred and resentment for his mother as he lives to become stronger. So this pain of his upbringing makes him go even harder in the gym. He almost uses all of his negative experiences and his mother's neglect of him as fuel. And this is almost like a common thread in real life too. And great movies do this. They kind of reveal aspects of real life through storytelling. So they kind of reveal these things that are sometimes implicit in real life, and we often gloss over these ever-present things in daily life, like overcompensation and things like this. But the movie reveals how clear this is, and it reminds you that, oh, these things are real, and it even can influence possibly personality change and a new analysis into who you are and who other people are and how experiences shape people. And real good movies illustrate relatable things to real life. And an example in real life I can think of is David Goggins. I don't know if any of my listeners know of him, but maybe some of the listeners to this podcast listen to other podcasts, and Joe Rogan Experience is the biggest podcast in the world, and Goggins has been on there a few times. So I guess there's a chance that you guys have heard of him. David Goggins, he is just this, he's like an extreme endurance athlete. He held the world pull-up record. He did like thousands of push-ups. He was there for like, I believe it was like a couple days straight. He can run over 200 miles. He was doing extreme marathons every weekend. At a certain point, he's a Navy SEAL, but he had a very difficult upbringing, an abusive upbringing, and he was bullied, and he was in a terrible, terrible place. And he says that he uses this pain as fuel. So this extremely hardened mind state sometimes comes from the most pain. And maybe that is where ambition comes from pain and from not having things, to doing whatever you can to have those things, or not just materially, but almost like psychologically, and to be someone after all these people told you weren't anything. So this is kind of what this movie is illustrating. All the times when people put Chiron down and bullied him and all these things, it turned him into almost a monster in a way, a very hardcore person who was totally different than that person who was bullied as a kid. And he really kind of overcompensates for this. And it's very interesting how this movie shows this theme in here, how this kind of sub-theme of overcompensation within this more general theme of, being shaped by society. How did society make you overcompensate rather than you just being who you wanted to be from the start? And this overcompensation from insecurity, it also is shown with Kevin, the teenage Kevin. So the teenage Kevin, when he was talking to Chiron in high school, in the hallway or whatever, he detailed having sex with a girl to make it so clear to Chiron that he wasn't gay. He said, he was kind of bragging about his sexual encounter with a girl so as to not revealed to Chiron that he was gay. Now let's go back to this meetup of Kevin and Black near the end of the movie, where they discuss kind of how they've gotten to where they are. Kevin works in a diner, and Chiron is this hard drug dealing guy, and Kevin comments on Black's drug dealing and on what he's become. So Kevin says, "Who are you, Chiron? Them fronts, that car, that ain't you." And Black says, "I'm me. You don't know me. When I got to Atlanta, I started from the ground up, build myself up, build myself hard." He says, "I'm me." If you actually watch the movie, in the way he says, "I'm me," he says it in such a matter-of-fact way, almost as if he hardly really knows who me is, or at least doesn't even really know how to describe who me is. He hardly knows himself deep down because of all the ways life has determined what he should be, rather than him choosing who he wants to be. He just says, "I'm me." And who is that you, though? Is that really you? Or did that you become from all the ways society was pressuring you to become a certain way? And Kevin knows what Chiron is like inside, because he's known him as a little kid. He knows he's just a shy, timid person, possibly caring person. And Kevin knows that this persona Black now puts on is only a persona, and it's not actually him. This idea of a persona, where does this come from? Well, what I know it best from is Carl Jung, who is a famous psychologist. He was under the tutelage, well, not under the tutelage, but he was more of a colleague of Freud. He was greatly influenced by Freud. And he has this archetype of the persona. The persona is like your public self, whereas your self is the more harmonized, unifying agent of the psyche, who you really are. So according to Carl Jung, I guess in this case, black is like a persona of Chiron. Chiron is the self, and black is like this persona Chiron puts out, and it's not really who he is. And when he says, I'm me, I'm black, it is you in a way, but that's just your persona. It's not who you are deep down. Now, we've discussed how Juan was faced with this conflict between being himself versus what society made him to be, and how Chiron had that experience as well. Kevin also has this experience as well. Kevin is Chiron's best friend from an early age, and he tells, as I mentioned, Chiron about getting detention for being caught having sex with a girl in the stairwell. He says, they caught me with this trick in the stairway. So Kevin, what's happening here, he's overcompensating to Chiron so as not to expose his secret that he's gay. So here, he chooses to conform to these societal pressures of being straight, heterosexual, black male, rather than being open about who he truly is to Chiron. And Kevin, in the movie, he has some kind of a passive yearning to escape from these societal pressures. You can feel it. And the sexual encounter that Kevin and Chiron had on the beach, Kevin, while he smokes with Chiron on the beach, and they feel the breeze and they feel free. They're under the moonlight. We'll discuss what the moonlight means in a second as well. That'll be the final thing. But they're under the moonlight. They're feeling free. And he says, man, that breeze feels good as hell, man. Sometimes around the way where we live, you can catch that same breeze. It comes through the hood, and it's just like everything stops for a second because everyone just wants to feel it. And he says, he also, so just this idea that he wants to feel this freedom. He's been so suppressed by what society wants from him, and he wears so many different hats, and he can't really expose who he is. He's seen Chiron get bullied for being gay, so he remains closeted. And this breeze he talks about, he kind of just has the idea that, man, sometimes like I just want to, it feels so good sometimes, man, just to feel free for once. He also has a discussion with Chiron. He says, what do you cry about, Chiron? Do you cry? Chiron says, I cry so much sometimes. I think one day I'm just going to turn into drops. And Kevin says, then you just could roll out into the water, right? Roll out into the water like everyone else trying to drown out all their sorrows. It just sounds like something you want to do. So Kevin in the movie speaks in an interesting way. So when he says it sounds like something you want to do, what he seems to actually be saying is it seems like something I want to do. As a closeted gay person, he finds it hard to express how he is really feeling in a lot of different ways. And he kind of imposes this idea of it sounds like something you want to do on Chiron. But you can tell by the way he says it in the movie, it feels like something he wants to do. Just roll it into the water and drown out all his sorrows and be free. So Kevin really resonates with Chiron. And even though he's speaking in terms of the way Chiron feels, you can tell he also yearns to feel like he's going to escape from his own sorrow. He talks kind of, as I mentioned, passively rather than communicating to Chiron that this is the way he actually feels. And earlier in the movie, the reason I'm thinking in this way about it is because earlier in the movie, he also kind of showed this similar pattern of saying things very passively, even though he may really be the one who's feeling it. He says to Chiron in high school, he says, after he tells him about the experience he had with the girl, he says, I know you can keep a secret, dog. And after telling him this, Kevin stops and he stares at Chiron for a second, almost as if he's trying to say that he's keeping a secret too, that he's gay. And there's a moment, a beautiful moment in the movie where they pause for a second and Chiron kind of stops up and they look at each other. And who knows what's going through their mind. Initially, I thought it might be, oh, maybe Kevin kind of knows that Chiron is keeping the secret of being gay, but everyone already knows Chiron is gay. So I think the idea there was that when he said, I know you can keep your secret, dog, and he stopped up, it had something to do with how Kevin is keeping a secret too. And he is kind of speaking in such a passive way so as to not expose who he truly is inside. Now, we'll talk about also the sexual experience he had with Chiron, how he conforms to societal expectations rather than be himself. So they had such a meaningful encounter there on the beach while feeling free under the moonlight. But after Kevin drops him off, he says, he just acts like he feels nothing for Chiron again. He says, I'll see you around, Black. He even goes back to the nickname that Chiron hates so much. And that's just not something you expect from someone who cares for you. And so he's really suppressing his feelings as if going back to being what society expects of him rather than how he truly wants to be, someone who has genuine feelings for Chiron. And these feelings are suppressed until years later when they're adults. When Kevin finally calls Chiron years later. And another way Kevin conforms to what others pressure him into being is when he actually ends up beating Chiron, beating him up due to peer pressure. The bully Terrell, he used to hang out with Kevin back in the day, and he says, "Oh, Kevin, man, you used to always beat someone up whenever we would say so, or whenever we called for something to happen, you would do it. No one's like that now. If I gave you a name, would you still beat him up?" And he's like, "Yeah, man, I'm still hard. I can do it." And he says, "Beat up Chiron." And instead of obviously not doing this because of the care he has for Chiron, he decides to beat up Chiron, man, and conform to the bully's pressures upon him. And Chiron keeps getting back up over and over as if to say, "You're really going to betray me like that?" Because the rule of the name of this beating up game, was you beat them up till they stay down. And Chiron kept getting up and kept getting up as if to say, "You're really going to betray me like that?" This is a very emotional point in the movie. And definitely brought tears to my eyes the first time watching it. And he says, he kind of is getting up and he looks directly at him. And the cinematography is so incredibly crafted. And it's almost like, after the night we had, you're really going to do that? You're really going to let others dictate the way you feel about me? And it's just such a heartbreaking moment while conveying this conflict between Kevin being who he wants to be versus being who others pressured him into being. And when talking to Chiron years later, though, Kevin shows that he finally did end up learning Juan's lesson of being himself rather than being who others make him. So Kevin, when they're talking at the diner Kevin works at, he's telling Black now, he says, "I never really did anything I wanted to do. All I could do is what folks thought I should be doing. Wasn't ever really myself. Now I got little Kev, who is his son. I got this job, man. I'm tired as hell right now, and I ain't making more than shoe money, but I got no worries, man." So Kevin finally is doing what he loves, and he's cooking at this diner, even though he's making just pennies. And this love of cooking is demonstrated in an incredible montage where he makes a special meal for his long lost friend. And it's not so fancy. He uses kind of a bowl to make the rice look good, and he sprinkles something on there. But it's a great montage showing Kevin seems to be at a better state now, where he's finally being himself, and he's cooking for this man who maybe he still has feelings for, and he's finally starting to express himself, not like what he was before, where he was totally doing the opposite of expressing himself. He was suppressing his feelings for Chiron and actually ended up beating him up, which is the total opposite of that. So Kevin finally does seemingly reach this place where he's being himself rather than what society wants him to be, even though we see that Black is not quite at that point yet. And maybe he's far from it. And the end of the movie, Kevin and Black are kind of caressing each other and comforting each other. And Kevin is more comforting Black, maybe to signify that Kevin is at maybe a greater state of, I guess you could say, enlightenment, of accepting himself, whereas Black is still far from that, and Black doesn't really know who he is, and he got lost somewhere along the way. Let's talk about the meaning of the moonlight. So the moonlight was initially mentioned by Juan, where he said black boys under the moonlight look blue, or he told the story of the old lady who telling him that when he was a kid. Chiron also is under the moonlight and Kevin are under the moonlight during their first homosexual experience. And kids are shown playing in the moonlight right after Chiron makes up with his mom. And finally, at the end of the movie, as he lays with Kevin as adults and he's comforted by him, the movie cuts back to Chiron as a kid when he was little under the moonlight by the beach. Really incredibly beautiful cinematography as well in that case. But what is the meaning of this moonlight? So kind of as I mentioned in that the preamble, the kind of introductory paragraph of that I read out at the start of the podcast. Well, just the idea that when it's you under the moonlight, feeling the breeze of the beach, that's when you're you. It doesn't matter the glare that comes off of you to make you look a certain way to others. So the moonlight, black boys look blue. It creates some kind of a blue tint off their skin, but maybe that doesn't matter, the tint that comes off your skin. It's when you're most vulnerable, and that's when you are yourself. So that's why the scene cut to the moonlight when the scene when Kevin and Chiron were laying together and they were very vulnerable, and it cuts to this scene of Chiron in the moonlight as a kid because they're in such a vulnerable circumstance. But it doesn't matter what others see them as, even though they are different and they do look different. They're at their most vulnerable, but that's when they feel the most perhaps free because they're finally being themselves. So as Black lays down in this most vulnerable state, after telling Kevin he's not had an intimate experience since the day at the beach when they were in high school, that's when he's in his most vulnerable and pure state. So just like this child who's completely free facing the ocean, even though the ocean is filled with the unknown, and he's so vulnerable and people see the blue tint off his face, he looks different, he's different than everybody else. That's when he's free. And that's what the moonlight, every time the moonlight shows up in this movie, it has something to do with this vulnerable state, but also a free state at the same time. So it doesn't matter the glare that comes off of him when he's laying down with Kevin that could make him look different to others. That's when he's truly free of society's expectations and stereotypes. And that is, I think, this beautiful moonlight idea that Barry Jenkins was trying to convey, and also Terrell Alvin McCraney, who co-wrote the script, and the movie's actually based on the play by him. But this is really what this moonlight is. It's a really beautiful idea, I think, or at least this is how it came off to me. If you guys have any other ideas, please share those with me. But when this idea came off to me, this resonated with me, and that's why I'm communicating this today. I'm just trying to refine my place here. The other moments where there was the moonlight. So obviously there was the moonlight when Chiron and Kevin were together in their sexual experience, when again, to others they may be judged. The blue tint comes off their skin, but you look at them as two gay people, and a lot of people would judge that in a negative way, but that's when they were truly free and they had such a pure experience. Again, kids were shown playing in the moonlight right after Chiron made up with his mom. So in this case, it kind of represents that freedom as well. The weight lifted off Black's shoulders when there's some kind of a sense of purity and freedom once he's able to make up with his mom and release the resentment that he's had for so many years. This final scene in the movie, it's such a incredibly beautiful scene when they're holding each other, and then it cuts back to little Chiron in the moonlight, and you wonder what Kevin and Chiron are thinking, and it's almost like something of a butterfly effect happened, and maybe that's what they're thinking about when the butterfly effect that, well, Kevin, he chose to conform and beat up Chiron rather than show his true feelings for him. And then this caused Chiron to retaliate. Then Chiron got sent to juvenile hall. And then in the criminal justice system, he eventually met someone who put him on to drug dealing. And then he spiraled into someone totally different from who he initially was. So as they're holding each other there, and comforting each other, it almost looks like they're thinking of how different our lives could have been without, if we actually were who we wanted to be from the start, how different it could have been and how different our experiences could have been. And it's such a beautiful, heartfelt, sad moment because they've lived so long not really knowing who they are. go into the wrong places. And Kevin mentions that I believe he was on probation. Yeah, he was on probation, and they went down the wrong track. And it's almost as if they wonder, what would have happened if we just were ourselves from the start? And how all the ways that society shaped us in a negative way, if we could have broken free of that. And it's just, there's so many ideas they could have had running through their mind. And another amazing fact of this movie, it makes so many things run through your mind, and you're thinking, what could they be thinking? And it's up for interpretation, because the movie ends right there. It doesn't really tell you whether they recovered, whether they ended up having a relationship, what happened. But it is almost more of a sad ending, because we don't know how they're going to recover from where they are now at this very difficult state. Now, this is kind of what I was mentioning at the start, and I'll reread a portion of what I wrote at the start and told you guys at the start. So, when moments of freedom do arise for people under the moonlight, it can be like standing under the moonlight by the ocean. While their skin reflects a blue tint, they look different to others, but at the same time free as the ones who stands without a care under the moonlight. Paradoxically, it is in the most vulnerable state of judgment from others for being oneself when a person feels the most profound sense of freedom. So, in that vulnerable state, when they hold each other, and Chiron is this big this big guy who works out, this tough guy, but now he's just being hugged by Kevin. It's in this vulnerable state when he is truly him. And there was also one more thing I wanted to mention. When Chiron, there was a moment in the movie when Kevin had called Chiron, and he called Chiron to meet up, and Chiron goes to meet Kevin in his adult life as Black. When he walks into the restaurant, he shows that he still has these tendencies of the shyness and perhaps some insecurity. And even though he has all these chains and the gold teeth, as soon as he walks into the restaurant and he sees other people, he puts his hands in his pockets and he looks down to the ground. And you can see that this was more of the persona thing I wanted to talk about. Despite this persona of being a tough guy, he still has who he truly is inside. And this is why he's maybe so confused about who me is when he tells Kevin I'm me, because he thinks he's Black 305, and he's this tough guy, but maybe he's not really in tune with that more vulnerable side. So despite this overcompensation to look tough, he still has this shyness and this lingering insecurity. The persona, the way he portrays himself with his grills, chains, and fancy cars does not actually match who he really is. And it's such a challenging thing to not be shaped by society. And everyone is shaped by society a little bit, or a lot, I guess you could say, because that really dictates kind of who you're going to become, what the options are. Are you in an overtly positive environment? Are you in more of a negative environment? Do you have opportunities there for you? Do you have good role models? Do you not have good role models? And so many parenting and so many factors in your life shape you into being who you are. And after all of that, and especially when it's negative, how hard can it be to really stay in tune with who you were from the start? That's really what I got out of this movie. And I hope you guys had some ideas about the movie as well. And that's why we're doing Insightful Thinkers Media and Insightful Thinkers Podcast. It's to stimulate thought, to stimulate discussion. And I hope I stimulated some thoughts in you guys if you're listening or watching. But thank you for listening and watching. Episode 13, the lucky 13, or unlucky. It is a Monday, so not Friday the 13th, so that's good. But yeah, this is another Monday of dropping. I can't remember if it's the third or the fourth in a row, but I'm liking the schedule. I'm liking to get my week started off right. This one's a bit later in the day, usually Monday morning, but it's okay. Still got it done on Monday, and we will be back next Monday again for something totally new. I don't know 100% what it will be, but I have an idea. So stick stick with me for that. If you liked this episode, you guys, please share it. I've been saying with at least one person who would be interested in this analysis. If they like Moonlight or if they just like film analysis, please share the link with them. If you like this episode as well, or if you like in-depth analysis into a lot of topics, you can subscribe to the podcast on whatever platform you're listening on. So whether it's Spotify, Apple Podcasts, YouTube, or anywhere else. If you're on Apple Podcasts, it allows you to leave a star rating or a review. And if you're on YouTube, please choose to like or dislike the video if you were not satisfied with the analysis. If you want to join the monthly ITP video conference call as well, you can support the podcast on Patreon. But in the end, you guys, whatever you do, even just listening and watching is more than enough, you guys. And this podcast is not for anything other than to, as a creative outlet and to stimulate thoughts and ideas in others and to create conversations, or even if it's just internal dialogue in your own head while you're watching. I just love sharing ideas. I love this medium to share ideas through podcasting. It's really proven to be a great medium for me personally to get my ideas out. Some people, man, everyone is so creative. Everyone has their own creative ways, and everyone has to get their mind state out in a different way. Some through writing, poetry. I do a little bit of poetry. Some of that is on the website. You can check those out whenever. But I think this is the best medium for me to analyze topics and break down topics. And everyone has a different way of communicating. Some people even communicate artistic nature through, for instance, like physical things like dancing, or you could do it through, some people do it through song. Everyone has a different way to communicate their thoughts, and everyone's minds are so complex. And I've very much enjoyed having this outlet to be able to communicate some of my thoughts that I want to get out and share with you guys. And I hope some of you guys have been sharing your thoughts with me. So thank you for that. And we'll keep the train rolling, and eventually more and more people will be tuned in to share their thoughts, and we can have some dialogue back and forth. So thank you guys for listening to the Insightful Thinkers podcast, everybody. So happy to be doing this. This is probably my favorite episode yet, just because oh my gosh, just because the complexity, how emotional the movie was, the soundtrack. We didn't even talk about a lot of, I mentioned the cinematography, but that could be an entirely episode onto itself. Barry Jenkins, incredible movie, incredible direction here, incredible acting too. I didn't even mention Chiron's mother. Here, let me, I have to get her name here, because she played like the drug addicted mother. And you could, there was no sense that it was even acting at all. Like, it wasn't until the end of the movie where I was like, wait, what does she actually look like in real life? What is she actually like in real life? Moonlight cast. Naomi Harris. Shout out to Naomi Harris. Mahershala Ali also won. He was the first Muslim to win an Oscar ever for this movie for supporting actor. I don't know all the exact role, but it was a major award he got. Incredible acting. It was the first movie with an all-black cast to win an Oscar, I believe, as well. So many great things about this movie. I'm looking at it, 98% on Rotten Tomatoes, 99% on Metacritic. Oh my gosh, I love this movie so much. I almost don't want to stop talking about it. You guys, thank you for listening in. I think I've discussed it the way I wanted to. I always want to do these topics justice. Definitely this one too, because I might never touch on this again, and it almost makes me sad never to be able to touch on it again. But thank you guys for listening and listening into my end of episode spiels as well, which I always seem to have. But thank you for tuning in, everyone. Again, for the millionth time to the Insightful Thinkers podcast. We'll be back next Monday morning for more in-depth analysis into a diverse set of topics. Take care, everybody.